Brooke Lee West, just like her father in the past, tried to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. As soon as someone started opposing Brooke's desires, their life was in danger. The district attorney called this crime the most disgusting, the strangest, and the most unusual case he had ever handled. And this case captured the attention of the entire country. This is the chilling story of Brooke Lee West and her bizarre family. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. On February 5, 2001, a warehouse manager in Las Vegas called the police to report a foul odor coming from one of the storage units. He had unsuccessfully tried to contact the unit's owner before breaking the lock and opening the door. When police arrived, they found a sealed plastic trash barrel inside, emitting a putrid stench and leaking a strange liquid. As it turned out later, the barrel contained a badly decomposed dead body. At first, officers thought it was a child's body because of its size. But when the remains were pulled from the barrel and the plastic wrap around them was unwound, to their shock, they discovered the corpse of a frail, elderly woman. In the same storage unit, police found a purse containing an ID belonging to a certain Christine Smith. Books were also discovered there, the Satanic Bible and the Geography of Witchcraft. After a forensic examination and cross-referencing with police missing persons reports, detectives established that Smith had disappeared 3 years earlier. The victim's face had been covered with a plastic bag. This suggested she had either been suffocated or asphyxiated. Unfortunately, due to the advanced decomposition, police were unable to determine Christine's exact cause of death. Christine Smith was born in 1932 during the Great Depression to a family of Eastern European immigrants. Her childhood was difficult. She grew up in poverty. The family survived in a very peculiar way. Her parents literally sold their daughter, forcing the teenager to service adult men. That's why Christine dropped out of school at 13 and rushed into marriage at 16. It was an extremely toxic marriage because her husband continued what her mother and father had done. He forced the young girl into prostitution. She felt humiliated, angry, yet terrified of her husband, whom she considered a gangster. The marriage lasted about 2 years, then she managed to escape. Christine's second husband was Leroy Smith, a U.S. Army veteran who had served in the El Paso Police Department. They had 2 children, daughter Brooke and son Travis. After Leroy lost his job with the police, the family moved to California hoping to take advantage of new economic opportunities. Leroy himself was a controversial figure. He openly proclaimed white supremacy, practiced Satanism, and was heavily involved in the occult. So life under the same roof with him was far from ideal. Christine's and Leroy's fates were very similar. Smith was the son of Russian immigrants who had moved to the U.S. while he was still an infant. When the boy was 5, he watched his drunken father attack his mother with an axe. An ordinary family argument ended in tragedy. The man swung the axe and chopped off his wife's head. Naturally, the woman died. Leroy was left in the care of his 3 older sisters because his father was imprisoned for murdering his own wife. But the child's hardships didn't end there. The sisters quickly grew tired of sacrificing their youth to raise their little brother. The girls wanted freedom, not to babysit a small boy. They put Leroy on a bus with a note saying he was an orphan, that his mother was dead, and his father was in prison. The sisters hoped someone else would take care of the child. After a couple of stops, realizing he was surrounded by strangers, the boy got off the bus and burst into tears. He didn't understand where he was, where his home was, or what to do. He was only 5 years old. A kind woman noticed the crying boy and took him with her, but in reality, she had nothing to offer him either. She was homeless and an alcoholic. Nevertheless, Leroy lived for 11 years in a tent on the street with his new mom and her friends. When he grew older, he joined the U.S. Army and never saw the woman who had essentially raised him again. At 18, Smith met his peer Christine, who later became his wife. At this point, The lives of two young people who had endured so much childhood trauma could have taken a turn for the better. The couple could have supported each other and healed from the past together, but unfortunately, that never happened. Soon after the wedding, Leroy left the army and became a police officer. Apparently, his difficult childhood caught up with him. He began abusing his authority and flaunting his status as a law enforcement officer. Someone like Leroy should never have become a cop. First, Smith openly proclaimed white supremacy and bullied people of other races. Second, when arresting people for drug possession, he simply pocketed their money, kept the drugs, and resold them. While on duty, he often arrested women working the streets and used their services for free. Constant access to illegal substances and alcohol led Leroy to severe addiction. He drank hard liquor like water, and various prescription drugs were freely stored in his kitchen cabinets and drawers. Christine was also far from an ideal wife and mother. She tried to drown her childhood traumas and difficult life in wine. The woman didn't work and spent most of her time hanging around bars. Naturally, this infuriated her cop husband. Drunken fights, scandals, and brawls were constant companions of the couple. They were wildly jealous of each other, each trying to prove they were right. Neither parent, consumed by their personal lives, cared about their children. One could say Brooke and Travis grew up like orphans. No one raised them or took an interest in their lives. So from the cradle, the children were left to fend for themselves. By the time Brooke turned 7, her father had been fired from the police for stealing money. Leroy wanted a fresh start, but realizing his reputation in town was ruined, the whole family moved to Bakersfield, California. The move and the children's hopes for a better life came to nothing. Christine and Leroy didn't even bother renting a house or apartment. They stayed in cheap motels and, leaving the kids in the room, went out partying. Sometimes they wouldn't return for days. Then 7-year-old Brooke, forced to care for her 4-year-old brother Travis, went room to room begging food from other motel guests. When the parents came back from their binges, the children had to endure endless insults and beatings. Their bodies were constantly covered in bruises and scratches because Leroy would grab whatever was at hand and lash the kids with it, so Brooke was actually glad when her parents didn't come home at night. In short, Christine's and Leroy's difficult childhoods gave them no incentive to change anything in adulthood. They simply repeated their own parents' behavior, turning their sons' and daughters' childhoods into real torture. On top of everything, Leroy repeatedly cheated on his wife, leading to constant fights and confrontations. One night, after yet another argument, when her husband fell asleep, Christine grabbed a gun, pointed it at Leroy, and pulled the trigger. There was no bullet in the chamber, so no one was hurt. The woman put the gun under the pillow and went to sleep. It's unknown whether Christine really wanted to punish her unfaithful husband that way, or if she knew the gun was unloaded. Brooke and Travis were forced to wander with their parents from motel to motel. The children had no permanent home and lived half-starved. They were punished and beaten for no reason. So it's no surprise that both the boy and the girl were completely broken. Eventually, the family situation became so unbearable that Christine and Leroy split up. The man was tired of hearing his wife's constant, though justified accusations, so he simply left her, taking the children. Leroy was never a loving, caring father, but this way he probably wanted to hurt his wife even more. Soon the man moved in with his mistress, with whom he had been having an affair while still married. Christine didn't grieve alone either, and started a relationship with a married man named David. The fling didn't last long. David quickly realized what a mistake he'd made and suggested they part ways amicably. However, Christine had no intention of accepting being dumped again and decided to take revenge. She arranged to meet David in a busy bar, supposedly to discuss the situation. The man knew Christine was capable of anything, so he showed up with his wife, to whom he had confessed the affair. The couple planned to talk to the husband's mistress like adults, but Christine was beside herself with rage. It turned out she had smuggled a gun in her coat, and at one point pointed the weapon at David, trying to shoot him. She was arrested for assault and attempted murder. The court sentenced Christine to 14 years in prison. Now, Leroy Smith had to tell the children they wouldn't see their mother for a long time because she was in jail. Brooke already understood what was going on, but little Travis needed some explanation. The man came up with nothing better than to lie to his son that his mother had died, and worse, he didn't talk to Travis himself, but forced Brooke to lie. When Brooke started school, classmates who learned her mother was in prison for attempted murder began bullying her. Kids can be very cruel. So now Brooke felt unsafe, both at home and at school. School only made her life worse. Instead of stepping in and fixing the situation like any normal father would, Leroy decided he had been too hasty taking the kids. One fine day, he put Brooke and Travis in the car and drove them to an orphanage. And that was the best decision Leroy ever made, because for the first time, the siblings experienced care, a quiet, peaceful life, full stomachs, and attention from caregivers. 2 years later, Brooke's and Travis's lives were turned upside down again. Their mother, Christine, having served only a couple of years, was released and suddenly wanted her family back. She quickly got back together with Leroy. But when they arrived together to pick up the kids from the orphanage, Travis put on a whole show. First, for 2 years, the boy had believed his mom was dead. He couldn't understand how she could suddenly come back. Second, the child loved life in the orphanage so much that he categorically refused to go home. Travis kicked and screamed, and they had to drag him out by force. The children somehow sensed nothing would change in their relationship with their parents, and that's exactly what happened. After leaving prison, Christine tried to be a good mother for only a short time, but soon her alcohol addiction overpowered all her good intentions. She started drinking heavily again and disappearing into bars until late at night. And when she was home, she usually suffered from brutal hangovers lying on the couch. Leroy continued cheating with other women. The parents' behavior only deepened the children's feelings of resentment and worthlessness. Eventually, Brooke reached her teenage years, entered high school, and despite everything she had been through, managed to graduate successfully. Right after school, the girl wanted to live separately from her family. The only affordable way she saw was to enlist in the army. But being a good soldier requires certain qualities. Brooke didn't serve long. She quickly realized the army wasn't for her. She had no choice but to return to her mother's house. Although only a couple of months had passed while she was in service, her parents had managed to fight and split up again. This time for good. Her younger brother Travis also left home. The young man struggled with mental health issues. He started using the illegal drugs that were freely available in the house, and eventually became homeless. After the breakup, the Smiths' lives changed radically. Christine turned to religion, Christianity, realizing she had lived wrong all these years and now wanted to turn her life around. She wanted to quit drinking and completely stop taking illegal drugs. Her husband Leroy chose the exact opposite path. A woman who proclaimed herself a dark witch entered his life. She constantly talked to her new acquaintance about magic, love spells, curses, and the like. She told him what advantages devil worship offered, how to cast spells on enemies and control others. Gradually, the acquaintance with the self-proclaimed witch pulled Leroy into a dark world. He began calling himself a mage, attending meetings held in the woman's basement, and performing various magical rituals. So Christine and Leroy went in completely opposite directions. And what about Brooke? She stayed to live with her mother, but their relationship was nothing like that of close family. The girl always had the example of a toxic family before her eyes. And although Christine had now found the right path, as they say, her daughter simply didn't know how to build normal relationships. The women would fight, hate each other, then seem like a normal family. Most likely to spite her church-going mother, Brooke became interested in non-traditional beliefs. She kept in touch with her father and, like Leroy, practiced Satanism. Anyway, Brooke desperately wanted to get out of the house she shared with her mother, Christine. And soon, an opportunity presented itself. She met a young man named Ray and soon married him, The newlyweds moved in together, and soon they had a child. Brooke and Ray were struggling financially, so the baby's birth brought them little joy. The young woman found it very hard to cope with her maternal duties. Interacting with her firstborn caused her extreme stress and tension. A few years later, Brooke decided she no longer wanted to be a mom and suggested to her husband that they give the child up for adoption. But Ray, unlike his wife, had no intention of giving up his own child, and a huge fight broke out. Brooke, accustomed to solving problems with violence, talked her father Leroy into somehow helping her convince her husband. And one day a masked man showed up at Ray's grandmother's doorstep. The elderly woman opened the door and immediately took a bullet to the chest. The masked man was never found, but it's suspected that someone from Leroy's cult broke into Ray's grandmother's house. He shot the elderly woman to intimidate Ray and force him to agree to give up the baby for adoption, and the plan worked. Naturally, after that, Brooke and Ray divorced, and the woman had to move back in with her mother. Their relationship never improved over the years. Mother and daughter seemed to hate each other yet couldn't live apart. They constantly argued, were dissatisfied with each other, but stayed under the same roof. Brooke accused her mom of trying to control her life. Christine complained that her daughter abused her. The problems were worsened by money troubles, and neither woman had steady work because they often stole food from stores. One day, they were both caught and sentenced to 30 days in jail. Another strange aspect of Brooke and Christine's relationship was that they preferred to pick up men together. One of their hunting grounds was Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. The women would dress up in their best outfits and go looking for potential partners. This went on for years. At some point, Brooke did manage to change her life. She got a well-paying, steady job. She bought herself a new Jaguar and saved enough money to buy a house for herself and her mother. In 1994, Brooke West turned 41. At one of the AA meetings, she met Howard St. John. The man was 35. Sometime earlier, he had quit drinking and was now on the road to recovery. Just a few weeks after meeting, Brooke and Howard got married. The man moved in with his wife and her mom, and things in the house became far from ideal because Christine couldn't stand her daughter's husband. For some unknown reason, she took an instant dislike to her son-in-law. Every day, the house erupted in scandals over the smallest things. Christine fought with Howard. Brooke fought with Christine. Overall, the atmosphere was extremely toxic. One day, Brooke got fed up with her mother's whims. After all, she was the one supporting her. West bought an old RV, parked it near the house, and told her mother she would now live separately. Since Christine had nowhere else to go, she moved into the motorhome. Despite a good salary, money was still tight because Brooke spent more than she could afford. As a result, she again fell into financial trouble. Unpaid bills piled up, the Jaguar payment was due, and there was no money to be found. So Brooke hatched an insurance fraud scheme. She talked her husband into helping her torch the car to collect the insurance money. Late one night, Howard and Brooke drove the Jaguar to a deserted spot and set it on fire. The next morning, West reported the car stolen to the police. The burned vehicle was soon found. The insurance company paid the couple $18,000. Brooke was thrilled. Now she could pay off old bills and start living large. But the detectives handling the theft case suspected insurance fraud and called Howard in for questioning. Though the man told police nothing, Brooke panicked, convinced that since they let him go, he must have confessed everything. As soon as Howard got home, his wife threw a tantrum, accusing him of betrayal. As mentioned earlier, Brooke was used to solving problems with violence, so at one point she pulled out a gun and shot her own husband. The bullet hit his neck. Covered in blood, Howard ran screaming from the house and fled to the neighbors. Police and an ambulance soon arrived. Brooke West was arrested for domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon, and illegal possession of a firearm. Howard was taken to the hospital and given emergency care. The man survived, but his joy was short-lived. By the time he was discharged, Brooke was already out on bail. She knew full well her fate was in her husband's hands. First, he knew about the car scam and insurance fraud. Second, he could press charges for the shooting. which he initially did. But later Howard withdrew the complaint. The thing was, he had genuine feelings for Brooke, and she took full advantage of that. The woman apologized for her hot temper and promised to do anything he asked. She was even ready to sign the house over to him. The husband fell for her charms and believed his wife could change. He returned home hoping to start over, and then tragedy struck. Just 2 weeks after the shooting incident, Howard St. John was found dead in the California National Forest. A member of the public discovered the body lying on a riverbank not far from Brooke's house. The victim had multiple gunshot wounds and a plastic bag over his face. Suspicion immediately fell on Brooke West. She was arrested given her prior attempts. However, due to lack of direct evidence, the woman was released. Police assumed Howard had enemies who might have had a motive to harm him. The investigation into St. John's death was temporarily suspended. Apparently, Brooke didn't handle loneliness well because after losing her husband, she invited her mom back into the house. The women made up and decided to start fresh. They packed their things and moved to Las Vegas, renting an apartment with Brooke's insurance money. Christine was thrilled with Vegas. She instantly made tons of friends, started attending church events, and enjoyed life. Brooke, on the contrary, lost all purpose. She didn't want to leave the house. Her mother, who now had everything going well, started irritating her again. Brooke's mental health issues flared up, and she began seeing a therapist in Vegas. During sessions, Brooke shared her childhood traumas with the doctor, complained that because of Christine she had conflicts with her husband, and described her current situation. The therapist concluded that the mother appeared to be the root of all the patient's problems. Brooke decided something had to be done. She was truly fed up with her mom. One day in February 1998, one of Christine's new friends stopped by the West apartment. The women had been planning to catch up, but when the door opened, Brooke was standing there. She said her mom no longer lived there, that Christine had moved to California to live with her son Travis, and probably wouldn't return to Las Vegas. The friend was very surprised. From what Christine herself had said, she knew Travis was homeless, so where could she have gone? But the woman didn't ask unnecessary questions, simply took Brooke's story at face value and left. After that, no one ever saw Christine again. The elderly woman vanished without a trace. Brooke's mother couldn't have gone to her son not only because he was homeless, but also because in 1993, Travis himself had disappeared. But that became known much later. On February 5, 2001, exactly 3 years after Christine vanished, the manager of a public storage facility started receiving complaints from tenants about an extremely foul odor. Some people even said it smelled like death, so the manager checked every unit trying to locate the source of the stench. It turned out the smell was coming from Unit 317, rented by Brooke Lee West. Unable to reach the owner, the manager opened the container with a master key and found a plastic barrel inside. The trash barrel was sealed with a lid and wrapped in duct tape, so he couldn't see what was inside. When the employee got closer, he saw a whole puddle of strange, almost black, murky liquid had leaked underneath. The manager immediately called the police. Investigators opened the barrel, and what they found made them vomit. Right under the lid floated a layer of dead maggots, and beneath them were human remains. Due to extreme decomposition, most internal organs had turned to liquid. When detectives looked inside the plastic barrel, its contents barely resembled a human body. It was half solid, half liquid, and cube-shaped. Clearly, the remains had been inside for a very long time. Despite the overall condition, it was visible that the victim's head was covered with a plastic bag. Otherwise, it was hard to determine how the person had died or how long they had been in the container. The ID found there provided some answers. The medical examiner performed an autopsy. It turned out the remains belonged to Brooke Lee West's mother, Christine Smith. Detectives immediately went to Brooke to ask a few questions. West claimed her mother had moved to California to live with her son Travis. However, police found no evidence to support this statement. It also emerged that Brooke had been illegally cashing her mother's Social Security checks. Her fingerprint was found on the duct tape sealing the barrel. On September 5, 2001, the woman was arrested on suspicion of murdering her own mother. Faced with mounting evidence, Brooke claimed her mother had died of natural causes. She said she panicked, put the body in the trash barrel, and then took the plastic container to the rented storage unit. At that point, police only had circumstantial evidence, so they hoped Brooke would confess to killing her mother, but she didn't. She kept insisting Christine had died in her sleep while they were on a short trip and had stopped at a motel. The next morning when Brooke found her mom, she panicked and didn't know what to do. West was afraid police wouldn't believe her and would accuse her of Christine's death, especially since she was already suspected in the murder of her husband, Howard St. John. Brooke swore she never harmed her mom. Yes, she acted stupidly by hiding the body and telling no one, but she didn't take Christine's life. Of course, Brooke's story sounded unconvincing. The police didn't believe her. Nevertheless, it seemed time was on West's side. 3 years had passed, and the medical examiner stated that due to advanced decomposition, he couldn't determine Christine Smith's exact cause of death. The books on witchcraft and devil worship found in the unit suggested some kind of magical ritual. However, police quickly dismissed that theory, and Brooke herself denied any involvement with dark forces. The case might have ended there if not for the testimony of Neil Haskell, a forensic entomologist from St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana. It turns out that when someone dies, the first insect to land on a human body is the blowfly. Insects appear within minutes of death, starting the decomposition process. Dr. Haskell determined there were no blowflies on Christine's body. Instead, most of the maggots he found belonged to coffin flies or graveyard flies, insects that feed on corpses after initial decomposition. To figure out what time of year Christine disappeared, the expert decided to study the insect larvae floating on the surface of the plastic barrel. At first, after receiving the insect samples, Dr. Haskell was very disappointed. Then he realized why there were no blowflies. Christine must have been placed in the trash barrel within the first minutes after death, preventing those insects from reaching the corpse. But that version completely contradicted Brooke's story. A far more likely scenario was that Christine was still alive when she was put into the plastic container. So Brooke's entire tale about her mom dying in a motel room was complete nonsense, because there was no way she could have transported her mother's body to the storage unit without letting insects get to it. This proved West was lying. The fact that there were no blowflies on Christine's body was taken by police as evidence of premeditated murder. The case eventually went to trial. During the preliminary investigation, even more evidence against West surfaced. It turned out more than one person had suffered at this woman's hands. In 1996, Brooke's father was battling cancer. At the time, he was in a relationship with a woman named Diana. She claimed Brooke attacked her with a stun gun and tried to knock her to the ground. Fortunately, Diana managed to escape. It also came to light that Brooke had not only been collecting her mother's $1,000 monthly Social Security payments for 3 years, giving her a clear financial motive, but had also tried to cash her younger brother Travis's Social Security checks. Travis disappeared in 1993. Although his body was never found, West was accused of involvement in her brother's disappearance after it was discovered that someone had used Travis's Social Security number to register at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. The bill was sent to the address where Brooke lived. Travis's body has never been found, but given what West did to her mother, investigators were certain she had also killed her brother. The investigation into Travis's disappearance continued, but detectives couldn't find enough evidence. As with her husband Howard St. John, Brooke managed to avoid punishment. Her trial took place in July 2001. Brooke Lee West was found guilty of the premeditated murder of her mother, Christine Smith, and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Christine Smith was 65 years old. She was described as a friendly and cheerful woman. Her difficult childhood affected her adult life, and as a mother, she made many mistakes. Later, Christine found faith in God and tried to turn her life around. But her own daughter decided to take revenge for all the past hurts and got rid of her mother in the most brutal way. In 2004, Brooke demanded a retrial, again insisting her mother had died in her sleep of natural causes. The prosecution argued there was sufficient evidence for the guilty verdict. In the end, Brooke's appeals were rejected, and the sentence stood. Brooke Lee West was imprisoned for one heinous crime, though she was suspected of 3. She was supposed to remain behind bars for the rest of her days, but Brooke thought otherwise. In 2012, early one morning while inmates were heading to breakfast, West dressed up, altered her appearance, and tried to walk out of the women's correctional facility like a regular visitor. At 6:30 a.m., prison staff spotted Brooke at the security gate near the visiting room. She was stopped just a few steps from the main entrance, mere meters from the freedom she craved. Brooke Lee West was not born a monster. She became the product of an upbringing in a dysfunctional family. Of course, one cannot deny that Christine was partly to blame for what her daughter turned into. Clearly, the parents had their own psychological traumas, and they passed those traumas on to their children. But Brooke also had her own demons that she nurtured in her soul. By the time she committed the crime, West was an independent adult, and she alone bore responsibility for her actions. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.